Welcome to the deep dive. We're not just scratching the surface today. We're really getting into the weeds of what makes strategic decisions work, or often not work.
Right. And our goal, as always, to give you those key insights from some important research so you feel informed, but hopefully not, completely buried in data.
Exactly. And today we're diving into a McKinsey quarterly article, The Case for Behavioral Strategy.
Mm-hmm. It's a really interesting piece. It looks at how our own minds, our psychology, can actually undermine our strategies. But crucially, it also gives us tools to sort of fight back against that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Think about those huge decisions, a big merger, a major innovation push, entering a new market. You'd think it's all pure logic and spreadsheets,
Oh,
really.
you'd hope so.
But get this, that McKinsey survey found only 28%, less than a third of executives think their company's strategic decisions are generally good.
Wow. Only 28%.
I know. And this deep dive shows it's not just bad luck. A big part of it is
Well,
us, our own biases. But there's a solution, one that's often missed, that could boost ROI by nearly 7%.
that's right. And it connects to behavioral economics, understanding, the predictable ways humans make decisions. It's pretty standard now in finance and marketing,
Uh-huh.
but it's still lagging behind when it comes to those big strategic choices.
Okay, so why is that? Why aren't we using these insights more for the really crucial stuff?
Well, the authors argue it's one thing to understand biases in, say, consumers or markets. It's quite another to confront our own biases as leaders making the decisions.
Ah, okay. That's a tougher ask. More personal.
Exactly. And the article really highlights the costs when we ignore these things, failed M&A, competitors we just didn't see coming, huge projects, blowing budgets and deadlines. They've got the research to back it up.
So just doing more analysis, throwing more data at it,
Uh-huh.
isn't necessarily the answer.
Not on its own, no. That's where this idea of behavioral strategy comes in. It's about consciously building psychological insights into the strategy process itself to actively de-bias our thinking.
Debiasing, I like that.
Yeah.
Good.
And a really key point they make is that we can't just decide to be unbiased. It doesn't work that way.
Right, you can't just will it away.
No, we need new routines, new norms, maybe even a shared language to talk about these biases openly, and structured processes to actually counter them.
And those processes, they seem way more important than maybe we intuitively think. The article had some surprising numbers on process versus analysis.
Oh, absolutely fascinating.
Hmm?
They looked at, I think it was over 1,000 major decisions, M&A, big reorganizations, new product launches, large investments over 5 years.
Right.
And they examined both the depth of the analysis done beforehand and the quality of the process used to actually reach the final decision.
And the takeaway was?
Process was king. Significantly so.
Yeah.
Their models showed that the quality of the decision-making process explained about 39% of how effective the decision ultimately was.
39%. Okay, and the analysis part?
Only about 8%. Now, they controlled for things like industry, company size, all that. But process quality still explained much more variance than the quantity or detail of analysis.
Wow. Okay, so it's not saying analysis is pointless, right?
Not at all. Good analysis is still vital. And actually, a strong process often helps identify flawed analysis.
Ah. Oh.
But the big insight is that you can have the most brilliant, detailed analysis in the world. But if the decision-making process itself is biased or flawed, that analysis gets wasted. It doesn't get a fair hearing.
That makes total sense. You can have the right answer on paper, but if groupthink takes over or someone's pet project gets pushed through,
Exactly. It won't translate into a good outcome. And they even put a number on the financial benefit.
right, the ROI figures.
Yeah, companies that improved their decision process from the bottom quarter to the top quarter saw a 6.9 percentage point jump in ROI,
Almost 7 points.
compared to 5.3 percentage points for doing the same with analytics quality. So process improvement actually delivered a bigger financial punch. It's not just soft stuff.
Okay, definitely not just soft stuff.
Yeah.
So we know biases are real, they're costly, and a good process is key. What kinds of biases are we talking about in strategy? The article groups them into 5 areas.
Right. And they stress these aren't just random mistakes. They're kind of rooted in how we're wired: habits, training, culture, maybe even evolution.
Uh-huh.
They use that example of drivers. Even after being in an accident, most people still rate themselves as above average drivers. It shows just telling ourselves to be objective doesn't cut it.
So true. Okay, let's break down these 5 categories. First up, pattern recognition biases. What falls under that?
This is about how we connect the dots, which is usually helpful but can mislead us. Things like saliency bias,
Hmm.
focusing too much on something just because it's recent or vivid,
Yep.
or confirmation bias. We all do this looking for data that backs up what we already believe. And leaders with lots of experience can sometimes rely too much on analogies from the past that don't quite fit the new situation.
Or get slayed by a really good story someone tells.
Exactly, or a passionate champion for an idea. It can make us overlook flaws in the actual pattern matching.
So how do you counter that? The article says change the angle of vision. What does that look like?
It's about deliberately forcing different viewpoints. Could be, getting out of the office, talking to customers directly, visiting the front lines.
Getting boots on the ground.
Yeah, or using techniques like reframing the problem, asking, what if we looked at it this way? Role-playing how a competitor might see it, even running competitive war games.
They mentioned that web TV example, which I thought was really telling. Understanding why executives disagreed led to a better plan.
That's a perfect case study. Realizing the disagreement about manufacturing stemmed from whether their background was hardware or software. Well, that changed the conversation. It led to a hybrid approach and, crucially, a backup plan.
Right.
And another technique is creating a reference class. Basically, looking at a whole set of similar past projects or situations to get a more objective baseline for outcomes instead of just relying on one or two potentially misleading examples, like that Colonel Sepp's work in Iraq they mentioned.
Got it. Okay, second category. Action-oriented biases. Sounds like our tendency to just jump in.
Pretty much. It's fueled by being overly optimistic, especially about our own abilities and control, and we often underestimate how competitors will react.
Uh-huh. The classic hockey stick forecast.
Exactly. And sometimes the company culture itself kind of suppresses doubt. It rewards that appearance of unwavering confidence, even if it's not fully warranted.
So the countermeasure is recognizing uncertainty. How do you build that in?
Well, one practical thing is being clear about the purpose of a meeting. Is this a decide meeting where debate and different views are welcome, or an implement meeting where we need alignment and action?
That distinction seems important.
Very. And then using tools like scenario planning, what are different ways this could play out, decision trees, and doing a pre-mortem.
The pre-mortem, right. Assume the project failed and figure out why.
Exactly. It forces you to think about risks and potential pitfalls up front, and also tracking key metrics after the decision so you know if you need to course correct early.
Makes sense. Okay, third category. Stability biases. This sounds like the opposite problem being stuck in place.
Precisely. Resisting change, sticking with the status quo even when it's not logical. Things like anchoring, letting an initial number, like last year's budget, overly influence this year's thinking.
Right.
Loss aversion, we feel losses more keenly than gains, so we might avoid a potentially good change because of the fear of losing something we currently have. The sunk cost fallacy, pouring good money after bad because we've already invested so much.
Yeah, that one's tough.
And just general inertia, comfort with the way things are.
So how do we shake things up and fight that inertia?
One diagnostic is just looking at resource allocation over time. Are the percentages going to different divisions weirdly consistent year after year, even if the market's changing? That's a red flag.
Interesting. So look for those rigid patterns.
Yeah. Setting really ambitious stretch targets can force people to rethink assumptions. Maybe not full zero-based budgeting, which can be disruptive, but perhaps a small forced budget cut across the board to make people prioritize. Or even just digging into budget details more granularly can challenge that status quo thinking.
Okay. Number 4 is interest biases. This sounds like office politics.
It can be, but not always maliciously. It's about misaligned incentives or perspectives.
Oh.
Classic silo thinking, where departments optimize for themselves, not the whole company. But also, different leaders genuinely see things differently based on their roles or expertise. And those views can be unconsciously shaped by their own interests or what their part of the organization needs. Even emotional attachments to certain projects or teams can play a role.
So how do you make those different interests explicit and manage them?
Transparency is key. One powerful technique is agreeing on the evaluation criteria before you discuss the options. That makes it harder to shift the goalposts later to suit a preferred outcome.
Setting the rules first.
Exactly. And deliberately putting people with potentially conflicting views or interests together on a decision-making team can actually be beneficial. It forces those trade-offs and different perspectives out into the open.
Right. Makes sense. And the last one, number 5, social biases. This is about group dynamics.
Yes, our tendency to want harmony and avoid conflict within a group. Think groupthink, where everyone converges on an idea without really challenging it, just to maintain consensus.
Yeah, the illusion of agreement.
Or that sunflower management idea, where people just align themselves with what they think the leader wants, like sunflowers tracking the sun. A lack of dissent in a strategy discussion should actually be a warning sign.
So if everyone agrees too quickly, maybe that's bad.
It could be a sign that social biases are squashing alternative views. So the counter is to depersonalize debate.
How do you do that? Encourage arguments.
Not necessarily arguments, but healthy debate. Using specific techniques to stimulate discussion, maybe assigning a devil's advocate role. The article mentions examples from Kleiner Perkins and Xerox.
Okay.
Making sure you have diversity, not just demographics, but diversity of thought, personality, background on the team. Building trust so people feel safe disagreeing, and focusing the discussion on the ideas, not the people proposing them.
And leaders have a big role here.
A huge role. Senior leaders need to actively encourage dissent, ask the tough questions, and act more like orchestrators of a rigorous debate process, rather than just the final decision maker who everyone tries to please.
It's clear just knowing about these isn't enough. So the article lays out 4 steps to actually put behavioral strategy into practice. What's step 1?
Step 1 is deciding where to focus the effort. You can't and shouldn't apply intense debiasing to every single decision.
Right, it would grind everything to a halt.
Exactly. So prioritize. Focus on those really big, rare strategic decisions, major M&A, huge investments, crucial tech choices, and also on those repetitive decisions that collectively shape strategy over time, like R&D funding rounds or capital allocation processes.
Okay, pick your battles. Step 2.
Identify the biases most likely to trip you up in those critical decisions. This takes some honest reflection.
How do you do that?
Doing postmortems on past decisions is key. Where did things go wrong? What biases might have been at play? Also, just observing current decision meetings. Do you see excessive optimism? Over-reliance on certain analogies? Is debate encouraged or shut down? Look for patterns.
Got it. Then step 3 is choosing the right tools.
Yeah, selecting specific practices and techniques to counteract the specific biases you've identified. And this needs tailoring.
Tailoring how?
To the decision type, definitely. But also to the company culture and the styles of the leaders involved. What works in one place might bomb in another.
Makes sense.
So maybe it's bringing in outside challengers for business unit plans. Maybe it's demanding the raw data behind recommendations to look for alternative patterns. You need to find what fits your context.
And the final step, step 4, is making it stick.
Absolutely crucial. Embed these practices into your formal processes. Build them into the capital approval workflow, the R&D review cycle, whatever is relevant.
So it becomes routine, not just an occasional add-on.
Exactly. It makes it regular, expected. It takes practice to get good at this, and it really relies on building mutual trust within the leadership team so these discussions can happen openly.
So pulling this all together, the big message seems to be, acknowledge we're all biased, it affects our big decisions, but we can do something about it by being deliberate about our decision-making process.
That's it. It's about building a more robust framework. Not throwing out intuition, but supplementing it, challenging it, making sure we're looking at things from multiple angles before we commit. And the payoff, as we saw, can be significant financially.
Definitely. So a final thought for you, listening. Think about a recent strategic decision in your own world. Knowing what we've discussed, which of these biases, pattern recognition, action, stability, interest, social, might have been lurking? And what small change in the process might have led to a different conversation, maybe even a different outcome?
Yeah, it's a really powerful way to reflect. How do our individual tendencies interact with the way our organizations actually make choices? It's an ongoing journey, really, for all of us.